Yes.
Yeah, let's speak more about the Career Academy model. I'm a principal at Abraham Lincoln High School, which has had different iterations of academies over the years, and now we're working at a combined Career Academy CTE model. Just as a background, we're 38% African American, 33% Anglo, 22% Latino, 7% Asian, 23% special ed, 7% ELL. Poverty rate about 85%. Transiency rate 60%.
And teacher transiency has increased with the truncation of the school system here. So all that being said, I'd like to hear more about how the Career Academy model has helped similar schools.
Well, the traditional Career Academy model, as you may be aware, is really about identifying a career pathway sequence that the students take. And they typically come together for, there is a kind of cohort model within it, right, because the same students are in that. But there are some other components to it. So I'll go back and let me describe the kind of 4 components of what I refer to as the linked learning model, which is the kind of newer version of that. So one of them is having rigorous academic courses. So the idea is that every kid should learn a college preparatory curriculum as well. They should also have then this CTE focus, and then the ideal model is one where you integrate the two. So you're not studying CTE over here and math and science over here, but you're doing this, I mentioned this idea of integrated curriculum, and there's a really lot of interest and work being done on this idea of integrated curriculum. So we, for example, in California, we have these, and they have these nationally in some areas, called subject matter projects, where teachers work on professional development around subject areas like reading and writing. So they've been working on creating these integrated courses where they bring vocational teachers together and academic teachers together, and they redesign their curriculum so that they're basically kind of team teaching to some extent, a kind of both the academic curriculum in ways that makes it rigorous for college preparation, and a CTE curriculum. So that's a lot easier said than done. Okay. So those are 2 components of it. The third component of it is really, I think, very interesting, and it's called work-based learning. So the idea being that students should do a lot of their learning outside of school, and in particular in the workplace. Now, I have a colleague, David Stern, who's actually the expert on career academies, but he has told me that the traditional career academy model actually did include work-based learning as an activity, but it doesn't always get implemented. And the linked learning is the same way, because it takes a lot of work, actually, you can think about it, whereby kids can actually spend time in the workplace. You've got to find employers, they've got to structure it and all that. The best example of workplace learning that exists in a high school model is called the big picture learning, for those of you familiar with that around the country. Started in Rhode Island. They have them here? A big picture school?
Yeah, there's a big picture school in North Philly, and there's one in Kansas.
Okay. So for those that are not familiar with that model, the students spend about 2 days of every week outside of the classroom in the workplace. So it's a very heavy workplace learning model, which is interesting. But anyway, that's the idea of it. And then the 4th component is student support, right? You got to still provide a student support system. So that's a very kind of generic description of those aspects of it. But the proof is in the design and implementation, as you can imagine. So simply saying you have these components doesn't mean that they're always going to work well or whatever. But at least the idea of it is that we're going to use that CTE is central to education. And I submit actually to all kids. There's always going to be a group politically of parents and kids who want to have nothing to do with career and technical education, right? Because they're college bound and they want to take AP all the time and all that stuff. But there are a number of districts in California that are trying to go what they call wall-to-wall academies, where basically every kid in every school in the district is going to be in an academy. Now, they've supposedly done that in Nashville. I haven't looked at it, but that's at least the way they set it up. But they had to do some accommodation because they have IB programs in Nashville. I don't know, do they have IB programs here? So they have to appease the IB crowd. You can imagine who those are. So anyway, the challenges of that are not inconsequential. One of the major challenges with career academies is the idea that you don't want to really turn it into a tracking system, right? Where you dump the low-end kids into the career academies, and then the college-bound kids are over here, and then the two aren't integrated. So the first things first model that I talked to you about, they do wall-to-wall academies within schools, and they basically make sure they're homogeneous. That they're not stratified across academies. That's really probably one of the biggest challenges in designing a school-wide academy model is, how do you assure that you're not segregating the kids into tracks? So I don't know if that helps or not, but I think it's got a lot of promise in that model, really.
Yeah, it's helpful. We've actually been in Nashville. We've seen the model, and the beauty of it was aligned not only with the schools, the colleges, the business community, the political community. And one of the issues we face here is this sort of tug on the public system from other parties, charter systems, private systems. And about a third of our money that we get goes to charter systems. So there's this constant drain on the comprehensive resources, especially in the area when you mentioned supports, counselors, supportive service assistants, kind of the glue people, that kids could rely on. So I'm glad to hear that the linked model is prevalent, because we're trying to work more with that here. There's been some issues around the legal department about kids going into the workforce. So I appreciate that linked model, because that's something we really want to look at.
Anybody else? No questions? Oh, no. Oh, there's one. Okay.
I was very interested in your information regarding the practical guide. When you're thinking about building administrator, in thinking that also the money and all of the resources are rather limited, that we can actually need to think about what we can do and what our locus of control is with regard to practice. So when you were talking about the predictors or the early warning systems that perhaps would only yield something that would be low, obviously you need to really find out what it is that you're working with, so that you can take a look at these particular strategies and so forth that would actually work for you in your environment, and things that would not necessarily cost a lot of money. If you're talking about engagement with students, and what kind of scheduling opportunities you could provide so that the teachers and students work together, PLCs or any of those things, which can certainly help. So I would be very much interested in looking at that practical guide that you have.
Right. Yeah, I think that the teachers are key to this, a strategy for high schools. And that requires some structural arrangements in terms of planning time and how teachers are encouraged to work together. And in the case of CTE, it's really the idea of kind of bringing CTE teachers together with academic teachers, which sometimes is not necessarily easy either, because they have, the high school is a department structure, as you know, comprehensive high school, and that can work against the idea of integration. And that's really why kind of schools within schools or academies are designed in part the way they are, because the teachers also are in this group. So the teachers collaborate more because they get to know each other more, and the students do as well. So, but there's a lot of kind of practical challenges in putting it in place, no doubt about it. So the Hopkins has developed what's called the talent development high school model. That's really kind of an expansion of the career academy, because they do 9th grade academies as well, so there's that issue. The first things first model I mentioned to you, they also have special curriculum they design, because another feature of high schools, for many comprehensive high schools, is some of the kids come in very low on their academic skills. So you have to have a strategy to get their academic skills up, because if you put them in a regular math class or a regular English class, they're going to fail. So both the talent development model and the first things first model have designed special curricula for kids in 9th grade to get them back up to snuff with respect to reading and literacy and math skills. It's really critical. So you can't just throw them in academies and expect that to solve that problem. Yeah.
We did have talent development here in Philadelphia.
You don't have it anymore?
Not exactly, no.
Oh, okay.
Well, the current career academy model includes the 9th grade academy. But once again, it's the support issue.
Right.
It's the whole issue that you have a division of
folks that are helping. You have a leader, and when the budgets get crunched, the way they do it in Philly, we get the teacher allocation, and then the money that really gets hit is the support.
Yeah, this part. Yeah, didn't you lay off all your counselors at some point?
Yes, and then I've worked with, when I was in Reading, we worked with talent development, worked with Belfast, worked with McPartland, so Dr. McPartland, and it has a lot of potential, but it requires support and a cohort model, class sizes around 25 or so, teachers that are consistent, don't churn your teachers. and training and training. So it's interesting that the model is being expanded in other places. California, Nashville, Florida, doing very well with the model. But the eastern cities, where the need is the most, really, from an economic and a shall we say, equity point of view, we're having the most issues.
Right.
And so it's really a national issue that begs to say, why aren't we getting more support from that sort of funding?
Yeah, no, I mean, there is an issue, for example, about providing career training in schools in terms of equipment, and so the educational costs can be higher, but to the extent that we can marshal evidence to say it has a cost-benefit ratio that's positive such that we invest more, we're going to get more return, it should be persuasive, but I'm sure it's not always persuasive, yeah.
Good evening. It's been a long day, I know, for everybody. Leslie Morris, and I'm one of the program managers here at the Office of Multilingual Programs. So I guess I realize that your talk today is very broad scope because anybody who's in a high school anywhere in the country can relate to what you're talking about today and the research. So if my question might be maybe too specific, but I don't think it is. It's really about some of your research findings regarding personalizing education. And I guess my question is simply, what does that look like for multicultural populations? I know California leads the way in terms of its thinking and its actions and reactions to bilingual education, immersion. The pendulum has gone from one end to the other in California. But I have observed some schools in Los Angeles, and I have seen some culturally responsive instruction. So I guess my question is, have you looked at it that deeply, and where does that fit in with recommendation 5?
No, I haven't looked at it that deeply, just to have a short answer. But I think the principles would apply, but how it's done, of course, would really matter. So, as you probably are aware, we do have a tendency to kind of segregate linguistic minority kids as well, partly because they do require, in some cases, some kind of specialized instructional approaches that often regular classroom teachers are not equipped to provide. They don't have the training to do it or whatever. So there is a risk, and it's probably the case, that we do have a kind of a segregation in high schools along language background lines as well as academic performance lines. But having said that, I think there are models. I have some, without going in great detail about it, but I think there are some effective models out there that are similar to these principles that I laid out, or strategies that I laid out, that would be applicable to those populations of students. So, but it would take, thinking about integrated stuff. So it would take, for example, more training and involvement of regular classroom teachers to develop the skill set to be able to work with language specifically, language-related issues in their courses. So there's a lot of interest, for example, in like how science teachers might, for example, be able to provide more language supports and instruction that would be applicable or useful to linguistic minority students. It puts a lot of burden on the teacher, frankly, because it requires expanding their skill set, and so then we have to have the mechanisms whereby teachers are have more professional development time, they might have more planning time and things like that. So it's easier said than done, right? In terms of the models that we set up to improve teacher quality along those lines as well as other lines. Yes.
What is your opinion of the Common Core and the impact it may have on high school dropouts?
Well, I mean, there is a bit of concern about if it makes high school more rigorous, we're going to have more dropouts. So, I mean, of course, the big unknown is the test, right? The status of the test associated with it, and what schools do about, like, so for example, in our case, if we modify our exit exam along the lines of having to take the Common Core assessments that are being developed as the basis for graduating from high school or not. So it kind of really depends. I think in general they're a good thing in the sense that it is more integrative across the curricula, and that's a good thing. I think it's going to emphasize things like problem solving and stuff better, so I think the basic nature of the curriculum, I think, is a positive. But how much it might impact the dropout rate, I think, is the unknown part right now, because it really just depends on how it's implemented, and like I say, what level of assessment might be required in terms of meeting graduation requirements, for example. And we just don't really know. But there is a concern about it.
The main, I forgot what word you used, but they were the highest percentage, the collection of high schools that had the largest dropout. Earlier in your slide, I believe it was like a couple of hundred. Are those schools spending the resources that the state has given them to implement the Common Core in a different way?
I don't know. I mean, we're just now studying how schools are working at implementing the Common Core, right? I mean, it's just being implemented as we speak. So it's not really. I mean, I'd say there's some teachers that are actually practicing it now, but my understanding, at least in California, is there's a lot of professional development work being done just now on getting it kind of integrated into the curriculum. And of course, the tests are not aligned to it yet either. So we've just suspended our testing, for a couple of years until the two national tests are kind of up and running. So there's a lot of unknowns about the test side, I think, especially with regard to, and with respect to English learners' performance on that test as well. Yeah.
Something I didn't see a lot of, and maybe it's just because it's not relevant to the research, is the impact of peers on the dropout rate within schools, and how having a school district set up with having so many magnets and so many charters pulling students, not necessarily the best students, because there are a lot of really great students in the neighborhood schools too, but pulling a lot of the students that are motivated or have people motivated in their families to go to these other schools. How does that impact kind of having these dropout factories?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, peers obviously matter, right? And we can kind of see it more in some of the case studies that have been done, of specific high schools. But the idea in general, of course, is that a student who's kind of hanging around other students who are not very motivated to be successful, who are maybe engaging in antisocial behavior or even illegal behavior, who are into cutting class, or skipping school and stuff, it's going to have that effect. And that's the kind of challenge, I think, of setting up I know that you have a lot of charters in Philadelphia, and you mentioned magnets, and you have magnets as well. So to the extent that we kind of create kind of a segregated system, then the kids that are left behind, so to speak, are the ones that are more susceptible to those peer effects. I mean, I've done some work myself on school composition as a factor. That's not quite the same as peers, because the peer influence is going to be outside the school as well as inside the school, as you know. But the school composition really does matter. We have pretty strong research about it. So it's a concern, if we concentrate more and more kids, more and more kids that are kind of at the bottom academically in the same schools, and the other kids, go to charters or go to magnet schools or something, and so what's left are, the kids that are most vulnerable, for example. So I think that is a concern. I'm not sure I have an answer for it, but because the politics of how these things are set up within a district are pretty strong, and I'm sure it is here as well, right? So it's a challenge. So I think we ran out of questions. We have one more. No?
I'll ask the last question.
Okay, you can have the last question.
I guess part of what I'm thinking about is I was at the Big Picture School in North Philadelphia. David Bromley is the head there. He actually founded the one in Camden as well, I think. And it's actually a contract school to the school district, because they get kids that have been absent so much they've got no chance of graduating other than this way. And David said that the first thing they have to do is they have to get the kids to trust the adults.
Yeah.
They probably haven't had a great experience
before
that. That's right.
So much of the I can, I want to, and I belong has to do about relationships.
Right. I think that's true.
I'm wondering, because that leads me then to wonder, we talked about rigor, you talked about relevance, so you didn't use that R word, and then we talked about relationships. And I wonder if the dropout process model that you provided really is about those three things, about figuring out how to get better at all three of those things in ways that are meaningful.
You mean that I can, I want to, and I belong? Yeah, I think they're key. I think they're key to it. So, Carol Dweck at Stanford is, some of you may know this, but they're starting kind of a research center on motivation, and they have this, I guess teachers are allowed to use this, but they're trying to promote the idea that teachers can assess what they call their academic mindsets. That's another term that's being used. But if you look at the items that are on her surveys of academic mindsets, they map onto that model really closely. I mean, maybe not exactly, but pretty well. So, as I said before, there's kind of increasing evidence, kind of a convergence of evidence, I would say, around the importance of these kind of attitudes and beliefs about school and about learning as being the keys to them. So, I mean, just take the one about I belong. If a student doesn't have a sense about being welcomed and feeling they belong in that school, I mean, that's behind the 8 ball. So that kind of translated directly into what we called emotional engagement. They're just not, they don't like school, and if kids don't like school, I mean, how motivated they are going to be to learn or pay attention or do anything like that. So, and that's where relationships, I think, really matter. So when we did this intervention, and this was a middle school in Los Angeles, the one I would describe that I was involved with, they had this very close relationship between the adult. In this case, it was what we call a counselor advocate. It was interesting because we let these adults define who they were on their business cards, and they decided they wanted to be called counselor advocates. And the counselor, they were actually trained as counselors, so they actually had a background in counseling. But the advocate became, because these kids were almost all Spanish-speaking and the parents were not very knowledgeable about the school system, they became the liaison between the family and the school. So they became the kid's advocate, basically. And their role of advocacy, which is what most parents do for their own kids, but if you're not equipped to do that because you're unfamiliar with the system, or you're working 2 jobs and never at home, or whatever reasons they may be, non-middle class kids, disadvantaged kids' families often don't have the human capital or social capital to be an effective advocate for them. There's parent programs they're probably aware of that are actually designed to improve the advocacy skills of parents in terms of training them about how the system works. But anyway, we function in that way, or our counselors function in that way. And that was all about relationships. It was all about relationships. And I think that's true, the big picture model, because they meet this person when they walk in the door, and that's who they work with.